There is a spirit of the universe. There is a creative intelligence, a creative energy that is always moving forward. It is always moving upon itself and within itself, and its movement is toward higher and higher experiences or expressions. You are an individualized expression of that universal creativity. And we have been placed here to discover ourselves, to discover who we are or what we are, and to begin to live from the highest parts of that which we are. Now, man in his human condition lives from a side of himself that we call sometimes personality, the ego. It has many names. And in that side of ourselves, we do not represent ourselves very well. We misrepresent ourselves. But this superconsciousness, this divine mind, this infinite presence, this God, as you understand God, by whatever name or concepts that you may have been reaching out to establish your own conscious contact, is speaking to us through illumined people and always helping us to move forward into our ultimate good. You see, God has your ultimate good in mind, but strangely enough, God is having a very difficult time getting us to cooperate. As a matter of fact, God is having a very difficult time getting our attention at all. Today we're taking up the study of the fourth of 12 steps that have been given to man by this divine mind, this superconsciousness, as the way for us to be restored to our spiritual condition. You see, it's your destiny to be illumined. And tonight we're going to take a giant step forward in the direction of that illumination that ultimately we must experience. Whatever system you've considered to be the correct system, whatever religious system or spiritual system, it has promised you a destiny that is beyond your day-to-day experience. Is that not correct? And we're here tonight to take a giant step forward. Now, in Lessons in Truth by Emily Cady, that's one of the basic unity textbooks. Again, I bring your attention to the chapter on personality and individuality. And the definition for personality is, it's the human part of you, the person or the external part of you. It belongs, personality does, to the region governed by the intellect. Your personality may be agreeable or disagreeable to others. When you say that you dislike anyone, you mean that you dislike his personality, that exterior something that presents itself from the outside. It's the outer changeable man in contradistinction to the real or inner man, the unchanging self. And that inner self is what we would call individuality. It's that perfection that has always been there. That is our spiritual condition. And our ultimate good, if we are to achieve it, will be achieved because we are restored to our spiritual condition, to our individuality, so that we can begin to come from, to think from, love from, feel from, solve our problems from that place in us of reality. The unchangeable mind or Spirit of God that has been placed in you from the beginning. It is there. It cannot be put there. It is there. And those parts of us, those unreal parts of us that separate us from the experience of this reality, must be separated from. You see, man is a spiritual being who has fallen away from the awareness of his true identity, and he believes many things about himself that are not true. For example, he sees himself as a limited human physical being. And he sees his fellow man as even more limited than he himself. Most of what he believes about himself is either completely untrue or at the very best only partially true. I dare say that there's not one of us here this evening that really knows the truth about ourselves. But it's possible, because you are spiritual, created in the image of the Creator who is Spirit. And if this is true, then what the Scriptures say about us is correct, that we are co-creators with God. You see, whatever Spirit thinks comes to pass. That's what creation is, Spirit thinking. Spirit moving upon itself, a movement within its own mind. And what it sees materializes. So that everything created, everything existing in the visible world can be said to be a thought in the mind of Spirit. So man, that means you and me, cannot escape our role as creators, because man is spirit or spiritual in nature. And man as spirit thinks. And what a man as spirit has thought manifests as that man's own life, his own personal circumstances. Now, it matters not that man has thought in error about himself and has seen himself as being limited. You see, when man uses his mind, he is using the creative mechanism of the universe. He's using the mind of God, because there's only one mind, and what he thinks will materialize, and doubt it not. Now, at the purely human level, the process is so slowed down that man does not realize that he is the creator of his own world and of the circumstances that surround him. You see, he thinks, and he's a little slow, and it takes a little while, and so by the time his experience has materialized, he thinks it's coming from some other source. As a matter of fact, you can't convince him of it. It's much more convenient to believe that God is doing it to us, isn't it? And in a certain sense, this is true, because it's our use of the mind of God in us that is doing it to us. It is the use of our individuality, of our own spiritual nature. Now, a righteous man in the Scriptures is one who uses his mind correctly. And an evil man, or a sinful man, is one who falls short of the correct use of his thinking mechanism. The word sin, as a matter of fact, is an Anglo-Saxon word used in ancient archery, meaning to miss the mark, to fall short. And have we not done that? Have we not fallen short of the proper use of the creativity that exists within us? Another name for spirit is mind, capital M-I-N-D. And the poet once wrote, mind, the master power that molds and makes, and man is mind. Evermore he takes the tools of thought, and shaping what he wills brings forth 1,000 joys, 1,000 ills. He thinks in secret, but it comes to pass. Environment is but his looking glass. So can you see that man, not knowing what he is or who he is, has taken the creative machinery of mind, and through the wrong use, the misapplication of his vast powers, has misshapen himself and his world, and he has created a fantasy world both within himself and without himself. Now, if this fantasy world be unreality, if that's the unreality that we have experienced, then somewhere we must find our way back to reality, to what is real and eternal and permanent. Let's call reality sanity, giving it a new context. Or let's call reality man's spiritual condition. We want to be restored to our spiritual condition. Paul said, let that mind that was in Christ Jesus be in you. Let your spiritual condition that is already in you, let it be in you. Stop letting anything else be in you except your spiritual condition. Choose ye this day whom you will serve. In order to experience this condition, a person must become willing to think in a new way about himself. If our old way of thinking has been the problem, then to continue thinking in that way is not going to provide the solution. To continue to seek answers in the manner that we have sought answers with the people with whom we have sought answers is merely the blind leading the blind, and we all fall into the ditch. Now, the first step of this new way of thinking that we are considering is to admit that we are powerless, that of ourselves we cannot manage our own lives. And isn't that a new way of thinking? How many people do you know who care to jump right up the first thing in the morning and admit that? That goes against the grain of our thinking, of our intellectual thinking of the past. It goes against the grain of most of the things that we've been taught in life. Let me read to you from the first chapter of 1 Corinthians. He, God, has chosen a plan despised by the world, counted as nothing at all, and has used it to bring down to nothing those the world considers great, so that nowhere can anyone ever brag in the presence of God. In other words, when you and I get where we are going to get, we will not be able to brag and say, I did it. I have arrived here myself, this self that I am. I figured it out. And I talked to God. You should have heard that beautiful prayer I prayed, and I really put a con job on God, and if you would like, I will talk to God for you. No way. No. It's the one who has discovered that he, of himself, has no power of his own personality, that his personality, that outer shell or self of him, can do nothing. Then something can begin to happen. Because as long as a person believes that they are great, or that they are all right, or they will soon be all right, thank you, or that the family, or the company they own, or the company that they work for, or the retirement program, or ADC, or anything else in the world is going to help them, or to fix them, or to straighten them out. As long as there remains in us one last shred of hope that some external thing is going to fix us, then we're not going to get where we want to go. As a matter of fact, we won't get there until we can admit a clearly defined personal need based on this first movement of consciousness, of our awareness that we need help. And so this first new action of the mind, consciously and deliberately taken, is based on the concept that unless I am changed. Now that's a new way of thinking, because always in the past we have thought, if my life could be changed, if these external things could be changed, if you can just fix these people, God, then I'm going to be all right, and put a little bit more on me to help me a bit. But no, now the idea is, unless I am changed. And following that, we immediately moved into a second shock wave of reality. We came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity or to our spiritual condition. In other words, that a power greater than ourselves can change us. You see, Spirit is restoring its reality, its condition in us. That was the second step we took, and next we really went all out. We made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we now understand God. And with that step, with that movement in mind, because remember, we must begin to correct the incorrect use that we have made of our creative machinery, our own minds. We must begin to use our minds correctly using the system that has been given to us. And the fourth step is that we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves, or we made a searching, fearless, and honest examination of our minds. And at first glance, this may appear to be just too easy, or just plain unnecessary. But let me assure you that this is not the case. The most difficult action that the human mind can take is to examine itself. This is so difficult that only a very few people, a very small percentage of those who walk upon the face of the earth ever achieve it. And therefore, only a very few people ever experience dramatic spiritual experiences. This is true because of the law that's stated in a number of ways to the effect that he who cannot observe himself will never see God. Now, there's much precedence for this step from Genesis to Revelations, but very little action is taken with this step in the spiritual life, unfortunately. And incidentally, these 12 steps, or the way, exist in hidden form in the Sermon on the Mount and in the book of James. Now, why is it so difficult to see ourselves and to get honest with ourselves? This should be easy or simple, one would think. Primarily, it's because man still lives from the lowest part of himself, one, his instinctive nature, and two, his intellectual mind. Now, the instincts are great, and creation gave them to us for a purpose, and without them, we simply would not be complete beings at all. And yet these instincts that are so necessary for our existence often have far exceeded their proper functions. And powerfully, blindly, many times subtly, they have driven us, they have dominated us, and they have ended up, in many instances, ruling our lives. Our desires for sex, for material and emotional security, and for an important place in society has tyrannized many people, and they are not aware of it at all. As a matter of fact, this is where practically all of our troubles come from what has been called our lower nature. It really is not our lower nature at all. It's a very important part of our nature. But you are more than your instinctive nature, and you are more than your intellect. You have been given a mind that far exceeds these levels. And the problem is that we've tried to find our happiness and our peace and our security on earth from this lower level, when all the while the answers that we seek must come from the higher part of ourselves. So it has been the overuse, the overreaction to a lesser part of ourselves that has caused our real problem. All of this part of us is good when put in proper focus. So when I refer to our lower nature now, I'm not talking about something that must be cast aside and no longer experienced. I'm talking about something that must be lifted up into a higher understanding and consciousness. Now, these problems that I mentioned are the experience of every one of us. No human being, however good, is exempt from these troubles. And nearly every serious emotional problem can be seen as a case of misdirected instinct. Now, step 4 is our vigorous and painstaking effort to discover what these liabilities in us have been and what they are, because we want to find out exactly how and when our natural desires produced experiences that began to warp us and began to shape our lives in negative ways. And we wish to look squarely at the unhappiness that this has caused ourselves and others for one reason. This is a positive step, because by discovering what our emotional deformities have been, we can move toward their correction. You can't correct anything you can't see or that you don't believe exists. But now here comes a real problem. There's a solution to it. But here's a real problem. The part of our mind that we're accustomed to using, the intellectual mind and the instinctive mind, does not want to take this action. It does not want to examine itself. As a matter of fact, it isn't equipped to do this, nor is it trained to do this. You see, our intellectual mind is connected to the five senses. As a matter of fact, our intellectual mind is called our sensual mind. That's not a derogatory description of it. It just happens to be what it is. It's our sensual mind. Now, the five senses connect us to what? To the outer world. So man in his intellectual mind and his five senses is relating to the outer world. Man, so to speak, stands inside himself and looks away from himself and never is aware of himself. He does not know himself. And how many times have the illumined ones said, "Man, know yourself." But man in his human condition has not yet learned to look at or to observe himself, and he's not yet learned to hear himself, to listen to himself. He cannot hear himself in what he's saying. He speaks all the time and does not hear his words. He's not learned to touch himself with his thought. Remember not long ago in a class when I suggested that we go home and look in a mirror, look squarely at yourself, right straight in the eyes, and speak your name and say, "I love you." And some of you tried it and came back and told me how absolutely shocking it was. We were afraid to touch ourselves with our minds. Man has not yet learned to taste his emotional responses to life. We have all kinds of negative emotions that we don't see. We're so busy seeing the things that we're reacting to negatively that we give ourselves the freedom to vent all kinds of venom that we don't see. Give ourselves the privilege to do this. You see, we have not yet learned to smell ourselves. And by this I mean to get a whiff of the kind of persons that we really are. Take a good sniff of yourself tomorrow. And see and hear and feel, who are you? What is coming from you? What is issuing forth from you out upon the world? Because what comes out of you and enters into the world will come back to you as your experience, and you will never have another experience. You see, we've been trained to see all of our problems as originating outside ourselves, and it's true that these problems do exist outside, but the underlying cause of all our problems is internal, never external. And nowhere in metaphysics does anyone who really is awake say that problems don't exist. They are there. But they are effects. And any scientist, any engineer will tell you that you cannot solve a problem dealing with effects. You've got to get back to basic causes. And we can't do this. Do you know why we have not been able to do this? Because we're pretty nice people. You bet we are. Except for a few bad breaks, such as the accident of birth. Pretty bad break, wasn't it? I remember the time in my life when I spent hours and days concerned because I had not been born into this mythical family that was in my mind. It was something like the Ford family. And in it, I would have been the older son that would have gone off to school and played games, and I don't just mean football either. And in time, I would have come into my own. And I lamented the fact that it wasn't that way for me. I lamented it so much that I would sit down and cry because life had not done better by me. It had given me so many bad breaks. Isn't that ridiculous? And except for the accident of our birth or a bad marriage or two, we really wouldn't. And that wasn't our fault because we were deluded. We really would not have had any problems. Now, we don't believe that about anybody else. Why do we believe these silly things about ourselves? The Fourth step calls for a new kind of thinking about ourselves. It's a thinking that is absolutely rare in the human condition. You will probably not see it at the office tomorrow. It's called honesty. Self-honesty. It's the kind of honesty that begins to examine itself and look at itself. Listen to the words of Bishop Sam Shoemaker, an Episcopal priest and former leader of the Oxford movement in America. A man around whom the movement of Alcoholics Anonymous literally grew up, although he did not have that problem himself. He had other concerns. And Dr. Sam said, have you ever been drastically dealt with by anybody? Have you ever dared to be drastic in love with anybody? We're so official, so polite, so ready to accept ourselves and each other at face value. I went for years before ever I met a man that dared get at my real needs and create a situation in which I could be honest with him and hold me to a specific commitment and decision. One can find kindness and even good advice in the church, but that's not what we need. We need to be helped to face ourselves as we really are. I think that many of us in the church see ourselves as we should like to appear to others, not as we are before God. We need drastic, personal change. How many of us have ever taken a fearless moral inventory of ourselves and dared make the depth of our need known to another human being? This gets at the pride, which is the hindrance and sticking point for so many of us, and which, for most of us, has never even been recognized, let alone faced or dealt with. You see, you and I have now declared ourselves willing to launch out on a course of vigorous action in an effort to become this new kind of person with a spiritual identity who lives in a conscious contact with God, and we've become willing to go to any lengths to establish that conscious contact, and through it experience whatever it is that His loving, creative presence and power and intelligence has in store for us. Is that right? Is that where you are? Okay. Now here comes our first real test. Things have been relatively easy for us in the first 3 steps that we have taken. And though our decision was crucial and vital, that decision will have very little permanent effect unless we begin a strenuous effort to face at once and to be rid of the things in ourselves which have been blocking us lo these many years of our lives. In our outer world, the world around us, we can only see symptoms. We have to get down to causes and conditions, and causes and conditions exist inside us. And so here we're about to start to take a journey inside ourselves that we call a searching and fearless personal inventory. It's an examination of one's inside. And it takes guts to do it. As a matter of fact, any business which does not take a regular inventory of itself usually goes broke. An inventory is a fact-finding and fact-facing process. It's an effort of an individual or an organization to discover the truth about its assets and about its liabilities. And an important objective is to disclose damaged or unsaleable goods and to get rid of these things promptly without blame and without regret. Now, if the owner is to be successful, he must be honest with himself. He cannot fool himself about what's right or wrong. He better find out what his friends and his customers already know. And so it is with our lives, yours and mine. You see, your life is the business that your Creator has set you up in. You're the boss's child. I'm the boss's child. But like so many second and third generation owners who have inherited the family empire, we have perhaps thought our business was just going to run by itself without any understanding or management or discipline on our part. And we felt no responsibility to be involved with the management of our own lives. What did that have to do with living? What did that have to do with anything? What we wanted was out there, wasn't it? And out there is what needed our attention, not in here. You see, in here was all right. If we could just get out there fixed, then in here would take care of itself, wouldn't it? If you could ever get out there straightened up, wouldn't you just sit down and be happy for the rest of your life, wouldn't you, and successful? In all the days of my life, I have never met one human being yet who has managed to get out there fixed. Now, if you have done it, come and see me after this class. I want to learn more about it. See, that's not the way it works. If we get in here fixed, out there will take care of itself. Because out there is an expression of what exists in here, inside yourself, in your own mind, in this creative mechanism that you are constantly putting into movement, into action. And if we're to grow along spiritual lines, we must do what any successful business must do. We must take stock of ourselves honestly. We must search out the flaws in our makeup which have retarded our growth and caused our failure. Or, if you don't wish to admit failure, our lack of ultimate success. Now, being convinced that the self, the human self, the ego, or the little self, call it anything you want to, it's there. Manifesting in various ways is at the heart of the problem. We begin to look at its common and obvious manifestations within us, not the other guy. We know about him. This is the one that we need to know about. And again, those of you who are metaphysicians, let me refer you to Lessons in Truth on Personality and Individuality, to the chapter on denials, and to many other powerful pieces of literature that are available. You see, our problems all originate in the changing side of ourselves that we call personality. And man is almost completely identified with this limited and limiting side of himself that must be recognized, denied, or separated from, because this side of us can never know God. It can never have a spiritual experience. Only our individuality can have a spiritual experience. As a matter of fact, it is right now. There is a side of you right now that is constantly in communion or conscious contact with God. And our goal is to become united with this unchanging spiritual I am of us known as individuality. And so with this objective in mind and with the firm determination pushing us forward, what are the tools that we're going to work with? Well, number one is a pencil or a pen, and number two is a large pad, like a legal pad, a pad with many pages. And the next and most important tool is yourself. And beginning tonight, hopefully, with each one of us, and continuing for the next week and longer than that, we're going to go back to the beginning of our life and begin to come forward, and nothing counts in this process but thoroughness and honesty. And the first thing that I would suggest that you do is to take these sheets of paper and with them begin to block off your life into manageable sections. For example, take one page and mark it page 1, and at the top mark a heading 0 to 6, meaning your birth to the beginning of school. Page 2, mark it 7 through 12, your first grade in school until puberty. And then mark the next page, puberty, until you enter high school. And the next page, your high school years. And the next page, your college years if you went to college, or the first years that you were employed and married, whatever the case might be. In other words, if you will look back at your life, you will begin to see that it divides up into certain sections or segments. It will begin to unfold kind of like the sections of an orange, sections that are natural and manageable by you. Sections in which things happen, and then you move on to another phase of your life. So take as many pages as necessary and mark them off down to the present time. You may have 15 or 20 pages or fewer. Now, when you've done that, look around you now in your life. What composes your life, your livingness? Number one, maybe your marriage. So mark at the heading of a page, marriage. Well, you say, I'm not married. Well, that's your marriage. You know, if you're not, put that down anyhow. I'm not married. Number two might be your job, your employment. And you might say, well, I don't have a job. I'm a housewife. That's one of the most important jobs of all. Everyone has an area of primary responsibility. If you're a student, mark it down. Mark a page for children, for friends, for finances, sex, God. In other words, every area of concern or responsibility in your life must be included so that before you have started taking an inventory at all, you have your life all blocked out. And when your life, past and present, has been blocked off in this manner, then go back to page 1, 0 to 6. This is the beginning, and put everything else aside. And then go off to yourself and take steps 1, 2, and 3, admitting that you're powerless even to take your inventory. That you cannot do this by yourself, that a divine mind, one that really understands, is going to give us the courage and the understanding to fearlessly look within ourselves and confront those things that are there. Now, having done this, go back to your earliest memory and begin to write. Not so much think, begin to write. Write what happened to you. But then describe honestly your reaction to what happened to you, because the story of your life is not as important as your reaction to the story of your life. You will see that always two things were happening. One was the outer event, and the other was the secret inner reaction. You and your brother may have had the same experience, but two different inner reactions. And as you begin to come forward, you'll notice some amazing patterns will begin to be revealed to you. Things will begin to be evident to you and that you've not seen before, and you'll say, I wonder why I didn't see that. And the reason was we didn't look. We were looking out there. And remember that we're trying to be honest, but absolutely uncritical of ourselves. We're not judging, and we're not evaluating, and we're not calling things good, and we're not calling things bad. That comes at a future time with a future step. We are reporting to ourselves what is there existing in this computer that we call our mind. And we'll get into this more next week. We will not finish completely tonight. We'll be more involved with how this works in next week's lesson. Now, one thought here. Into your memory will flash a scene, perhaps, of your father taking you down to the corner to buy an ice cream cone, and it was a nice little trip on a warm Sunday afternoon. And nothing happened. Don't put that down. This is not an exercise in good memory. We're talking about taking an inventory of the events and of the reactions that have shaped your world and of your life, and of beginning to see the patterns that are there. And at this point, let me mention to those of you who are metaphysicians and have studied the law of karma, you'll understand why we're not going to become involved with this aspect here now. You will see these karmic patterns here too. They'll begin to be revealed to you. But we will just let that lay for the moment. Patterns, moods will begin to emerge. Now, because our surface record hasn't looked so bad, we frequently found that we have not found it necessary to take this kind of action simply because we have buried these defects deep down in us under thick layers of self-justification. In this connection, it's wise to write out questions and answers that will help to give us an aid to clear thinking and honest appraisal. Remember that the most common symptoms of emotional insecurity are worry, anger, self-pity, and depression. And consider carefully in your inventory all relationships which bring recurring trouble of this kind. And it should be remembered that this kind of insecurity always arises in any area where instincts are threatened. And questions that you might ask yourself might run something like this. What was my reaction to the discovery of my sex, whether male or female? Was it false excitement, curiosity, unrestrained sensual imagination? Was that reaction immoderate, abnormal, perverse, impure? What? Just how did I begin to react to the situations that developed later in my life? Did I burn with a guilt that nothing could extinguish, or did I insist that I was the pursued and not the pursuer, thus to absolve myself? How have I reacted to frustration in sexual matters? Now, I don't wish to get the idea that this is an inventory just of one's sex life. But this is a very important area of our lives and must be considered in its many ramifications and manifestations and experience. But we're looking at the past in all of its aspects since childhood and coming into the present moment. And we're looking at all situations that have caused anxiety, bitterness, frustration, depression, anger, all of the negatives that have brought us down into something less than our spiritual identity. How have I reacted to the behavior pattern of others? Why do I lack the ability to accept conditions I cannot change? Do I adjust myself serenely to self-discipline? If I'm unable to change the present state of affairs, am I willing to take the measures necessary to shape my life to conditions as they are? When we come up to the present moment, ask yourself, what are my fears? Why am I afraid? Am I a good friend, a good employee, a good spouse? Really? How do you feel about your marriage? Really? Really? Down deep inside yourself, where it really counts, how do you feel about your life, about your job? Are you easy to live with or work with? Would you hire you? Why not? Why wouldn't you hire you? What are the habit patterns that are continuing to cause you something less than success in your life? Begin to observe yourself as you would observe another person. Are you honest? Do you ever lie? Why? Do you live in a fantasy world? Do you live in a continued state of hopelessness that you've not been able to admit even to yourself? That you cover up, you lie about, deep down inside yourself, in the center of your gut? Do you believe that your life is over, finished, done? What's really going on in your mind? What do you believe about God? About tomorrow? It's important that we know. Questions like these and an examination of yourself will help to turn up the root causes. Next week we will take the fifth step of this experience into the spiritual life. So it is.